This is the January 31st, 1721 edition of the American Weekly Mercury, pulled from a Colonial pressed in Philadelphia. Read closely. It acts as a real-time record of a transatlantic ecosystem slipping into a state of total paralysis. To understand the pressures bearing down on the early 18th century, we have to read this document the way an imperial governor would, as a high-level geopolitical intelligence briefing. The dispatches logged here warn of three distinct crises. The first is a biological terror shutting down the major maritime ports of Europe. The second is a cataclysmic financial collapse ripping through the vaults and streets of London. And the final piece is the severe economic triage taking place right here in Pennsylvania, as merchants scramble to survive the fallout. Information moved at the speed of wind. Dispatches from The Hague, Dieppe, Bristol, and London took weeks, sometimes months, to cross the ocean. That delay created a dangerous compression. By the time these warnings reached the Colonial desk, the disasters were crashing ashore simultaneously. The British Empire was a deeply integrated machine. A fracture in a European harbor guaranteed an immediate, violent reaction on the streets of the Americas. The briefing begins in Northern Europe, at the opening of the Cambrai Congress. European powers dispatched their plenipotentiaries, diplomats armed with the absolute authority of their monarchs, to negotiate treaties and engineer stability across the continent. This Hague dispatch specifically tracks the preparations being made to receive these men so the Congress could convene. But while the diplomats prepared to draw neat borders with ink and paper, forces of nature were actively deciding who could move and where. Treaties offered no protection. Biological contagion was the true authority dictating the geography of Europe. A horrific strain of bubonic plague was radiating outward from France, forcing port cities into strict, desperate lockdowns. Outside the French port of Dieppe, locals spotted a vessel that had sailed out of the heavily infected city of Marseille. The Mercury confirms the town's worst fears. The ship was carrying the infection. The intelligence report is blunt. The sickness had already killed most of the men on board. This level of biological terror instantly dissolved standard maritime law. Commerce ceased, and legal procedure vanished. That deep paranoia jumped the channel into British waters, striking the major English port of Bristol. A captain returning to Bristol was placed under strict quarantine. Defying orders, he attempted to row ashore under the cover of night. Port authorities answered the breach with lead. The dispatch reports the captain was shot at and wounded, forcing him to retreat to his infected vessel. The maritime borders were no longer governed by magistrates. They were held by violent, paranoid enforcement of the law of infection. While the coasts locked down against sickness, the capital city of London was hemorrhaging from a completely different disease. The South Sea Company, a massive joint stock enterprise designed to consolidate national debt, had just imploded, vaporizing the wealth of thousands of British citizens. The Mercury details the immediate fallout. Ruined investors gathered in an extravagant assembly to demand answers. The anger escalated so quickly that Sheriff Belliers was forced to read a public proclamation against riotous assembling to clear the streets. Systemic financial ruin rarely stays on ledger sheets. It quickly becomes physical violence against the people managing the money. Mr. Ambrose Page, a manager of the South Sea Company, was cornered by an officer and lamentably beaten. The report notes the attacker would have killed him on the spot, driven by the extreme desperation of losing his real and personal estate. The decay extended to imperial management, with dispatches casually mentioning the scandalous behavior of the governor of Barbados. With the imperial center consumed by financial riots and political disgrace, the peripheral colonies were cut adrift, forced to absorb the shockwaves on their own. That brings the intelligence briefing back across the Atlantic, landing directly on the local colonial hub of Philadelphia. How does a local economy function when its parent empire is gripped by plague, political scandal, and a shattered currency? Survival required private action. Without reliable backing from the crown, merchants stepped directly into the vacuum. They executed their plan on the second page of the Mercury, through a public pact. Dozens of citizens bypassed imperial authority, signing their names. Their goal was the encouragement of trade and commerce, building a firewall to keep the local economy from freezing. They promised to accept a chaotic mix of foreign coins at strictly enforced exchange rates. They established exact conversions, pegging Leone dollars at 5 shillings and the English crown at 7 shillings and 6 pence. This was the physical reality of colonial commerce. You traded with whatever Spanish, Dutch, or English silver happened to flow off the docks. By setting these fixed rates, a group of local citizens executed the kind of macroeconomic stabilization normally reserved for a sovereign parliament or central bank. The January 31st Mercury documents a crumbling imperial order, but it also captures a practical response to that collapse. It is proof of the decentralized, self-reliant triage that would eventually define the American colonial identity.
The Daily Dispatch, history in print. No modern gloss, no modern hint, just black and white.